Hey everybody, I'm Ken and this is Joanna, and we welcome you to Leather and Lace, a podcast about the divine masculine and feminine and how we can bring these two forces together to bridge the divide in our world today. Today we're going to talk about a awesome topic. We're going to have some fun and go out into space and discuss UFOs. Fear versus curiosity. How should we respond to UFOs? This is an emerging topic of interest in our world today. As we've seen in recent news in the last several years, our governments are exploring the themes of these UAPs or UFOs dancing around in our skies and being sighted by commercial pilots, by fighter pilots, and now we actually have videos of ships and objects that we can't identify. So, uh, everybody has different responses to these things, and today we're going to explore a little bit the reason for those distinct differences and ways in which we might work together to promote a little bit more positive outlook in the way that we respond to this quite interesting phenomenon. Joanna, how are you today? This is going to be a fun topic. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and we'll jump right back in after this. Hey, so let's jump in here. Like Ken said, we're going to talk about UFOs, and in some ways, we are already starting to see where there's polarization, right? Should we be afraid or should we be curious and almost excited? Because I tell you, there are people who are actually curious and open to some benefits to expanding our perspective on, hey, aliens and other civilizations that exist outside of Earth. And just as, it's important to understand why we have these polarizations. Why are people afraid and why are people curious? So just start us off, Ken. I mean, why do you think some people view UFOs as a potential threat and others, and there are others, that see them as a sign of exciting possibilities?
Yeah, there's a wide range here, Joanna, and I grew up in the Star Wars paradigm. I remember as a young kid, I was watching Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader and all the ships fighting and forces battling each other, and that was sort of like our culture's introduction to what happens in space, even though it was framed as fictional, right? That was cemented into our minds as to this is the way that sort of civilization and action occurs beyond the earth. It's all based on control and domination and light and dark.
Mhm.
And that alone makes it very easy to extract or to have a fear-based response to anything related to something coming from outside of our planetary sphere. Um, and then we've had successive media-related and religiously indoctrinated dogma and theory and philosophy that still follows that same fear-based dynamic. The Men in Black movies, the Independence Day was a big one for me. I remember watching that one and thinking, man, I'm hopeful I never want to meet aliens because they're ugly and they stink and they have octopus arms and I don't want to deal with any of that. So,
That's so interesting that you had mentioned Star Wars because in actually Star Wars, it isn't necessarily about aliens versus human beings.
right.
It was about light versus dark,
Yeah.
Jedi versus, the Sith.
Uh-huh.
And so in some ways, it's actually a more balanced perspective of like
Yeah.
a, you know, cosmic existence.
Uh-huh.
But more recently, yeah, you have movies like Men in Black and things like that, where it seems to be more fear driven about potential invasion of alien species.
Yeah. Yeah. That theme of invasion or conflict or
Hmm.
war, I see as kind of like the more likely cultural paradigm that we've all been faced with. There are very
Yeah.
few of those media-related introductions to the alien or non-Earth visitor. One of the recent that I've watched, I think we've talked about recently, is the Arrival movie, right? This is about what seemed to be at least presented in that one as alien entities that land and then basically give us time to come and introduce ourselves to them and set up a communicative infrastructure and learn how they speak and they learn how we speak. And there's a very like slow but persistent dialogue development between the two. But that's only been in the last like decade or so that we've had that even that type of kind of patient and benevolent teacher student type paradigm introduced into the consciousness.
Yeah, for sure. But like, and that makes sense why there are a lot of people who fear something like the existence of aliens.
Hmm.
For a long time, it was just so abstract and kind of out there, right? People who believed in UFOs were conspiracy theorists and everything. But it's getting harder and harder to to do that with all the evidence. Even the government is showing us official footage of little UFOs and little things that look like Tic Tacs or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Um, and granted, it is a little bit suspicious of when the timing is when these things are released. But the point is, we also have regular people who are more and more coming out about their UFO experiences. So
Mm.
the point, the argument whether or not they exist is getting harder and harder to even dismiss now. It
Right.
seems as though collectively we are at a point where we accept the existence of UFOs.
Hmm.
The problem now is how are we reacting to that? And like we said at the onset, this episode is going to examine and explore the different ways that people are. We're starting to break into these camps of fear versus like curiosity.
Hmm.
And so as far as the fear, I think it's important to kind of explore and acknowledge why the root of that fear. And it is because of the messaging. It stems from our natural fear of the unknown, which is understandable. But there's also this like mistrust and there's this cultural conditioning, right? Like, why are we being made to fear UFOs? Because it feels kind of deliberate. And maybe it is just stemming from this natural fear of the unknown. But it could also get a lot deeper than that, right? With our own cultural history of what it means to be an invasive force and how we as humans have responded when we have had that kind of power to invade another civilization, right? When we think about natives versus explorers and what happened there.
Yeah.
So there are reasons why we could be afraid of an advanced species coming in. What do they want? Do they want to feed off of us? Do they need something from us to further their existence, right? Those are all the different narratives that we've been fed through Hollywood movies and
Yeah.
stories. But there is, like we have to first examine that within ourselves. Like, why do we have this fear? And is fear the only option?
You're so right. There's not a lot of stories in our, world or cultural history that talk about an external force coming in just to coach or teach. Even like the Christian Crusades, who of their own accord probably thought they were going to improve the societies that they were invading or uh, moving toward, like they still brought weaponry and they still brought disease and they still brought aggression toward many of those
Hmm.
forces. So even in the kindest, most benevolent situations of migration, there has been reason, legitimate reason for that fear. It's, as you said, it's sort of instilled in our mindset and a natural carryover into
Hmm.
any new theme that explores a conscious entity or group of beings coming from outside of our own borders, be it that our country
Right.
or our world.
Yeah, that's why I think it's important to look at this fear and not just take it for granted or take it as if it's just meaning to protect us.
Hmm.
Which fear often can help protect us. But when we look at it a little bit more closely, we start to think, well, is it just a projection? Are we projecting our human qualities onto these alien species? And I think that's probably limiting for how we can view this or how the perspectives that we have around the UFO mystery.
Hmm.
So when we think about it right now, in learning our history of what happened to, say, the Native Americans, we kind of, for me, because I actually took a college class to learn this, I know it's hard material to accept in what happened, but in doing so, I know now that that wasn't right, so we can learn from our mistakes. So in thinking about that, that's almost like resolving that karma. Like we can learn from our mistakes. I mean, even though we haven't publicly really acknowledged it and had a kind of healed those wounds as a nation.
Hmm.
I feel like a lot of us have done that individually. And so, in thinking about that, in healing that karmic wound of what happened, and we as a species, there's no benefit to saying, well, it was this people and dividing. It's like we are a human species, and we are responsible for what has happened in our history,
Yeah.
and how are we reacting now? And so part of that is understanding that maybe our fear of an alien invasion stems from our own projection based on what we've done.
Hmm.
But I mean, these are higher evolved species, obviously, if they can travel interdimensionally, it seems. So maybe they actually have evolved in other ways too, like in the way, like in their morality or their understanding of the interconnectedness of all beings, which even science
Yeah.
and physics are attesting to the interconnectedness of everything in existence. So I think it is important for us to understand our fear, but it's also important for us to think and figure out the root of it and to find out if it's necessary. And is it like, in many ways limiting us in how we can be more receptive to what's happening.
Yeah, there's a side of this that sort of begs the question, why haven't, if they exist and we're starting to see these things out there, why haven't they sort of introduced themselves to us in a mass scale?
Mm.
And if they are of a higher consciousness and presumably aware of sort of our present level of perceptivity of external entities or beings or threats in general, it sort of stands to reason they wouldn't want to associate probably with us while we're still of a largely fear or dominated dominator type matrix idea. Like, why would you want to go
Exactly.
associate if you're a benevolent kind group and you know that you're coming to a location where an advanced society goes and visits a tribe where the tribe is going to behead anybody that lands on their shores, you just won't go there. You won't associate with that group because you realize that
Yeah.
you're
Actually,
you're
yeah.
you're only going to be under threat. There is no possibility for any type of productive, compassionate, loving relationship between the two. So it
That
could
is a
be
good
also
point.
that they're looking at us and saying, you have to reach a certain threshold of
Mm-hmm.
maturity and openness as well, but from the fear perspective, um, before we introduce ourselves in that way, because you're presently of sort of like the equivalent of
A petulant toddler.
a petulant toddler or a warlike tribe,
Right, right,
that
right, right.
basically perceives everything outside as an imminent threat.
I do like that point, because if they were this, how we were within, I say we as a people, like what happened with, say, the natives, any indigenous people that got overtaken by an invasive force violently.
Hmm.
If that was what we were facing, if we had a rightful fear of that, why hasn't it already happened?
Yeah.
Right? We really need to be thinking about this in a critical way, because there is a possibility that this is an opportunity.
Right.
And so I like your train of thought of maybe they're just waiting for us to reach a certain threshold, to reach a certain maturity
Hmm.
where their level of consciousness can interact with ours. And maybe there's this sense of free will, and we might not be completely conscious of it.
Yeah.
But as a collective, this is why we exist as a podcast, because we're trying to get more unified with each other, because maybe there's like a certain grade that we need to achieve as a collective
Hmm.
of unity and cohesion before they can come and give us their gifts, to learn how to be more like them. It's just like maybe we're just babies, and until we can start to learn how to walk, we can't they can't really fully interact with us and communicate with us, right? Because we still have these fundamental lessons to learn about how our fear can often arise from like our lack of control.
Hmm.
and how that's not very mature, right? Like because we don't have control of something, we fear and what does a when a dog is afraid, it starts to attack, it starts to bite and things like that. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of where we are potentially in our own evolution, and so we're trying to move past that potentially, right? To move past fear and to maybe be more open and more curious.
We've seen even in the last 20 years or so with the acceleration of the internet and the use of social media tools that span beyond national borders, how much more open people are now in general to communication with an acceptance of international cultures and their ideals and their foods and cultural standards and beliefs and
Mhm.
that kind of thing. When I was growing up, like thinking about China or Iran or Russia, like there was this automatic enemy and threat-based association with especially the larger power foreign countries. But my kids now have friends in all of those countries and talk to them on the internet every day and see them as associates and like accept everything about them and love them. So it's a very different paradigm that came about largely just because of an establishment of a communicative protocol that allowed us to see for real what these people are all about and not just follow the pre-ascribed narratives that had already been delivered to us.
That's a
Um,
good point. I mean, I remember because I was born in the Philippines
hmm,
and I immigrated to the United States, Virginia, Northern Virginia specifically, when I was 6. And back then, 1987, when I came here,
hmm,
nobody even knew what the Philippines was. I
wow,
just felt very different. And this is like the beginning of all the reinforcements I got growing up, even today, why I feel like such an alien. I feel so alienated
really,
sometimes.
wow,
I feel so different. It started when I was young. I saw my little green card
uh-huh,
and it said resident alien.
wow,
And there's my little picture.
huh,
And as a kid, seeing that and knowing barely knowing English, but I knew alien.
uh-huh,
And I was like, I'm an alien.
wow,
I
yeah,
just already it just started that long
yeah,
journey of trying to fit in and feel like I belong here.
yeah.
That's another conversation for another day,
Now,
but
now you can take it as a compliment. Yes, we know you're an alien, and
yes, I
you're here to
resonate with
enlighten
being
the
a
rest of us Earthlings.
wanderer. Yeah. Yeah. So I like, so there is this idea of things becoming more unified here, even though
Yeah.
there's still a lot of polarization, and that is why we exist as a podcast. But we also don't want to lose sight of how we've connected
Mhm.
more. People know what the Philippines is now, and
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with immigrating, as long as you do it legally, I suppose. But yeah, it's like there is a lot more connectivity and openness to that. So maybe instead of focusing on our fear and projecting fear based on our history about what invasive forces are capable of,
Hmm.
we can look to project maybe our higher ideals on these species that
Yeah.
we have no idea about.
Right.
But we do have higher ideals as a human species. And I think the more we focus on that and project that into the world, into creation, into the cosmos, that would be what we end up creating,
Mhm.
just as a potential.
Yeah, you're touching on that sort of a shift in the dynamic of, presently we're coming out of what seems like a standard fear response to these entities and going into at least the possibility of being more curious and open to what it is they may present us. To me, it opens the possibility of reframing the entire architecture of existence and reality completely. Whereas right now, our existence on this earth seems to be based on resource acquisition from the earth and
Mm.
survival. As long as we can survive as a species on this planet, we are successful. Our goal is
Hmm.
to extract as much shit as we can from under the
While we're alive.
while we're alive, make as many things as we can out of it, not spoil the earth too much, but we don't care if we poison it and pollute it a little bit. And there's no real controls or protocols on that to prevent it from going out exponentially out of control over the next several decades. But we don't
Hmm.
really, we have traveled into space to the extent of, a small step outside of our own planet. And then we basically realized, like, maybe we don't have the technologies here to get beyond even our own moon. I think that's sort of where we're at right now, is realizing like we have capped out technologically with regard to our ability to project ourselves physically into the space environment. There's got to be some other way, right? In our minds and in our core, soul core, we know
Mhm.
there's some other way to connect in a knowing way with the rest of the universe, but we don't have access to the tools and resources right now to do it. That to me
Yeah.
is potentially what the opening to a new higher form of consciousness introducing itself to the earth awareness is what this is all about. Is first they introduce themselves, we get comfortable with them, they
Mhm.
potentially give us um, not give us, but work with us, coach us, teach us to learn new technologies, new sciences, new ways of understanding life and experience and reality. And then we work to actually develop the tools and techniques to go out and explore in ways that are um, non-exploitative, non-warlike, non-domineering. You know, I almost see that as like that's probably the path to extension beyond your original created sphere of existence is passing, like you alluded to earlier, this threshold that says I'm only going to do good things after I get past my own
Mhm.
boundary of expertise here. It's the whole reason we put a playpen around a 2-year-old when they're a child. We don't want them destroying all the fine china in the living room. Like it's likely something like that exists for a young civilization, and once you reach a certain point of maturity, you're probably given a little bit larger boundary to
Yeah.
work within.
Yeah, and I think another point in history we can look to kind of help guide us into this unknown time is when Galileo proposed that the Earth actually is what revolves around the sun and not the Earth is not the center of the universe. And also thinking about why that threatened institutions and why they went through such violent lengths to suppress that knowledge, right? So
Hmm.
now we're in a similar situation where there's this incredible new knowledge and what is being threatened by that and what are the potential, and like examining why there's a threat and what are the possibilities,
Hmm.
right? We're at this precipice again. And so do we want to believe in the fear narrative, or how can we approach UFOs with curiosity
Hmm.
instead of fear, right? Because it does open up a whole new possibility. Like, and that is scary. Again, we have to acknowledge that it's okay to be afraid. It
Yeah.
is okay. We understand, but try to move through that fear, move past that fear, because there is an alternative perspective, and that is one of curiosity. Do you want to go into that a little bit?
Sure, sure. When I was growing up, I lived in a small East Texas town, right? And I knew people in my town that were in their 40s, 50s, and 60s that had really never traveled even to Dallas, which was an hour and a half away. The big city was just too big and loud and too much traffic, and they didn't see any reason to go participate in that, and much less like own a passport and think about going beyond the national borders. Like it just did not exist in some folks' minds that there was anything to gain by going beyond the realm of experience in which they live day to day. And then there were others that I'd interact with who had been all over the world, and they had picture back in the day when we had picture books with the little slots in them where you could view the pictures, and they had pictures from Europe and Asia and all over the world, and they were proud of their travels and talked about their adventures and were willing to share and talk about all the different people they met and foods and beautiful sights they experienced. So there were two very clear, distinct paradigms of the hunger and curiosity for human experience that were evident, and I'm sure many people see that, and no matter where they grow up. This to me is another similar choice that we have, is like, do we want to stay just localized to the present experience that we have right now? If we look around and look at all of the existing systems, we've talked about this in other episodes as well. Um, We've we've reached a state of very obvious imbalance in almost every single system of operation in all of our world cultures right now. We're still warring, we're still exploiting,
Mm.
we're still, breaking laws left and right in order to keep making profit across all industries. And yet we just keep going and not really thinking about truly at a deep philosophical level as a human collective, is there a better way to do X, Y, and Z? So extending this curiosity out to other realms and other cultures and other similar planets to our own might give us some ideas from other ways and other races and other cultures and other civilizations about how have they evolved into a higher form of religion, of education, of relationship, of music, of science, of art, of all the existing subject areas of which we still find interest and reason to go to school and reason to study and reason
Hmm.
to enter vocation. Every single one of them can be expanded and improved if we open our minds and our curiosities to uh, potentially cultures beyond us having done far more research and have far more experience in those areas than we currently have.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to think about. I mean, for me, I like to understand and process things through analogy.
Hmm.
So, in what you were just saying, it kind of reminded me, it made me think of, how we give toddlers and babies replicas of real life things. Like we give them little
Yeah.
Tonka trucks and we
Okay.
give them little Hot Wheels or we give them little baby dolls. It's like little replicas of things.
Uh-huh.
And I'm wondering if it was like we're almost like babies in the cosmic scale,
Wow.
that we've been given things like religion and intellect and society, government, and those are actually toys.
Hmm.
And that those are the things we're playing with as a species, and we're being evaluated,
Yeah.
right?
Wow.
And how are we doing with these toys?
Uh-huh.
Are we able to play with the real thing? Are we able to actually now be mature enough to get our license and to participate in a more cosmic, larger society?
Yeah.
Are we able to do that, or are we still in this on our little playpen because
Yeah.
we can't get our shit straight because we're still fucking shooting each other and we're still arguing about bullshit when it's like we are doing this to ourselves as a collective? So let's get our act together, and so we can move on past the Tonka trucks and we can play with the real stuff, you know?
That's such a great analogy, and you got to extend it a bit to realize like I've got three kids. You know, one of those children was a pretty docile, easygoing kid who never stole toys and, didn't throw things. And then I've got another that extended that sort of behavior into like 5, 6, 7 years old. So there is a wide range and dynamic even within human children as to how
Hmm. Hmm.
sort of warlike and bellicose and abusive and that kind of thing. And when they choose to, if they ever grow out of that type of ego-based mentality. I love that thought, man. It just opens
Hmm.
up all kinds
I
of
know. I just came with it. It just came to me like, oh my gosh. Again, analogies are so powerful. I
yeah,
love
yeah.
because the answers are already in front of our faces. It's
Hmm.
already here if we have the eyes and ears to see and hear. The answers are right in front of our face. And so, yeah, I think that's a good way to ease us out of our fear is
Hmm.
that we've done this before. We've moved through crazy revelations of truth again when like we realized that the earth revolved around the sun. There was a lot of things that had to be processed, and I know we're far removed from that part of history, but if you think about how paradigm shifting that was for the people, at that time, we're at that too. And you know what, they make it through, and it's for the better. It's always the case. We witness this in our own lives when shit hits the fan, everything falls apart. We get divorced, we break up, we lose a child or a parent, anything. We can always rise and learn and become more whole and more a graduated version of ourselves through those things. And so this is another one of those opportunities. And how are we going to respond? I mean, could the way that we individually and as a collective respond to UFOs mirror, how we actually deal with other kinds of unknowns in our life? I mean,
Hmm.
again, when we think about that analogy of like, are we just playing with a bunch of toys that and we're being kind of monitored, or not in a negative way, but in a way that's like a gardener, looks at their um, garden.
Hmm.
Like, and they're thinking, okay, yeah, they're almost there. They almost figuring this out.
Yeah.
And so, and they're just waiting for us to have a better, more, consciously mature way of dealing with our fear and dealing with the unknown.
Yeah.
And maybe them revealing themselves to us now with more UFO sightings, more mystery, because I'm assuming that's under their control. Like they're not going to allow themselves to be seen for no reason, right? They're kind of slowly introducing themselves to us,
Yeah.
not outright because we have to figure it out on our own.
Hmm.
We have to rise to that maturity level. So it's an opportunity for us to examine ourselves. It always comes back to that. It's what is this reflecting about us individually and as a collective?
I absolutely agree. I think that that question of does this mirror the way we work with or deal with current unknowns in life?
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, so an example as simple as like when you go out and drive in traffic, is your general mood mentality and experience one of everybody around me is an idiot and I'm being threatened by every other driver and I'm trying to defend myself and keep myself from getting killed? Or do you go about it like we're all just a community here and we're getting along and I've been both of those, right?
Oh,
I've
yeah.
I've lived in that first mindset and been very tense and very aggressive and always hand on the horn and like, behaving like an idiot. And the experience that was returned to me was one that confirmed that everybody else on the road was an idiot too, right? I was projecting that to the world, and no surprise to me looking at it from this perspective, I got back exactly what I was giving out. But today, grown a little bit, aged a little bit, and learned a little bit, and I go out there and I'm as I guess congenial and loving as I can be on a road, and
Ah,
DC
that's
traffic is a little
wonderful.
hard sometimes, but it truly changed the experience. Like I don't have aggressive interactions at all. Like I don't even receive aggressive interactions from people anymore. So
Mm,
I think we can almost kind of look at this in the same way as like, how are you projecting out that I perceive you, the other, whatever that other is, whether it's somebody at the grocery store or an alien 20 light years away, as a threat, then that's more likely what you're going to perceive. But if you're willing to expand the possibility, like we're all coming from the same place here, literally the same source of consciousness, is there the possibility I can be at least open until I have it confirmed for me otherwise? Can I be open to the possibility that we're all just driving in traffic and getting to the same place and learning from each other and it's all going to be okay? I
oh
re
no, I don't know about that analogy because I will say, admittedly, that the what I when I drive,
uh,
I live in California, so it becomes very clear that I am not an enlightened being. I'm working on it. It's just, anyways.
you get a lot of catalysts on the highways, where you're
Yeah, you
saying.
do. You definitely do.
Yeah.
Yeah, but more seriously, I definitely find that there is so much value if we step into our own self
Mm.
and have a little bit of introspection, especially when it comes to these big topics. It's so easy to kind of put everything out here and expect this out here to change. So then we can react. But it's like it's actually the other way around. We need to kind of cultivate this strong sense of inner stability, a
Mm.
stability that is not dependent on what's going on out here. It's like, well, if I only have this much money in the bank, then I'll feel stable. Or
Right.
if only the government would disclose what they know about UFOs, then I'll feel stable. It's like, no, the true stability and what we really need to cultivate, and so that we can deal with, you know, cosmic revelations,
Mm.
is how strong is our core, not can you have a six pack or anything. No, like your inner stability, your sense of stability. And that has a lot to do with having faith
Uh,
and believing that whatever presents itself in front of us as as our reality is actually beneficial.
yeah.
I know that's hard. I know that's hard. And I know we're all different circumstances on
Yeah.
all of us, but that is your own individual journey. And maybe if you have a tougher life, you have a tougher mission. And maybe a different way to think about that is you're going to be made stronger. Because I have not had an easy life. I've had a lot of adversity. And you might not be able to see that because of how I am today, but that's just a testament to how much stronger I've become because of those things.
Hmm.
I don't need you to see it on my face and how I behave. I want you to see a positive person. I want you to see a loving person. I want you to see somebody that is humble and who just wants people to feel the same way about their own lives, and like to see that these are opportunities. The harder the shit is, fuck yeah, like approach that with excitement and curiosity versus fear and victimhood, right? So when we can kind of find that balance within ourselves, and again, it starts with you
Hmm.
always, then we can project that into the topic of UFOs and how are we going to respond with fear or curiosity, because it starts with you,
Yeah.
and you're going to manifest, and you're just projecting what you are to the situation ultimately.
It does expand the scope of the importance of this topic, really. I mean, this opens up a new realm of inner exploration potential for the
Mm-hmm,
individual.
mm-hmm,
If you can get yourself to looking at life almost like you sort of alluded to as a educational seminar or a video game, even like both of those themes, I like to sort of explore in the play mind space sometimes and think about like how would I treat this differently if it was just a video game or virtual reality today? Could I loosen up a little bit on the
mm-hmm.
focus and the seriousness and the achievement orientation and the worry and the concern about all the other stuff that's going on outside the house, like just taking yourself into a mindset like that, even for a few minutes, is almost like a meditative experience. It allows you to sort of disconnect from the distractions and the unrealities of your present environmental experience. And I think that applies to this UFO discussion as well. Like there's this entire big picture that has all the history and the media influence and the governmental influence
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm.
religion and all that. But at the core of it, all that really matters is what does the individual think and feel about this circumstance, right? Like
Yeah,
that's what's going to dictate and determine what outcome comes from any of these experiential type situations. Um,
yeah. I mean, it begins again with the individual,
yeah.
and together, if we all make the choice to kind of let go of our fear, to understand it, to feel it, and then to move beyond it together, it's only going to open us up to greater things. And I can't have a conversation about UFOs without bringing up Chris Bledsoe.
Mm,
And many of you probably, I don't know, who are listening right now know about Chris Bledsoe's story. If you don't, I really encourage you to look at him up and read his book, UFO of God. Um, he is known to a lot of people to be the most credible UFO experiencer. Not that there's a hierarchy or anything, but his message is very positive, and it does have a lot to do with opening your heart and not living in here all the, it kind of ties into our conversation last week between science and spirituality. It's like if you just get stuck in the logic, that is where fear lives.
mm,
And if you don't try to balance it out or open up your heart, then you're going to miss out, and you're just going to see negativity. You're going to see that projection of fear into your reality. But with Chris Bledsoe, he has, I don't want to go into his story too much as it'll take a lot of time, but definitely look it up. But he sees orbs all the time.
mm,
He goes outside and they come, and to the point where many people visit him so that they can see it with him. And he's been
mm,
able to do this with large groups, larger even if they have the logistical support to support a large group.
mm,
His story is becoming a lot more known, and it's incredible. He's received a lot of messages about like where we're headed as a people, and he says that it is up to us. Again, it is always up to us if we're going to be afraid, if we're going to continue in the way we're going with this hyperpolarization and warring and hate and divisiveness, then our evolution is going to involve a lot of pain.
Mm,
But if we can get our shit together and start to let go of our fear, because it's the fear that divides us all, and we start to see each other as a holy man that we can learn from, even if we don't agree, that is what's going to save us. That is our saving grace, is love, not just for ourselves and our family and our tribe, but it's actually the love for each other. The ones that are your enemies. I mean, Jesus said this, Buddha said this, everybody said this, that we consider to be wise, respectable, and masters, of being human. And so let's emulate that. And so with Chris's message, it's one of hope, and it is one that I think speaks to being open to UFOs and other beings as benevolent. Not to say that maybe there are entities out there that are of the negative polarity, but I'm just not someone that wants to focus on that.
yeah.
And
And how we tune ourselves, you are your own radio
mhm,
dial. How you tune yourself determines what you experience, what you get back. So if you want to sit in fear again and think about the discord and the possibility of attack and the domination, then that's the radio dial you're tuning yourself to. You should logically expect to be at some point perceiving that, whether it's having to do with UFOs or just human experience in general. I love the Bledsoe message. I'm not as familiar with
mhm,
his personal story, but I've seen some videos that he's presented and where he talks about the orb experience and light beings and angelics and having telepathic experience with
mhm.
entities beyond the physical space. Um, to me, it's an indicator of the expansiveness. You're not just opening your mind to new ideas. You're literally expanding the intellect, the belief system, the energetic experience, which leads to then actual literal no shit changes in the physical body. Like your senses, your vision, your hearing, your presumably at some point touch, taste, smell, all of the senses begin to expand and grow. And that's what multidimensional access really is not just finding new tools and technologies to get into dimensions that exist somewhere else. It's literally expanding ourselves to become more of the Godhead presence in the multidimensional space that already exists right now.
And that's exciting. I mean, to think about how little we actually know about the brain or about our DNA. There's so much of the brain that isn't being used. There's all this
Yeah.
junk
Hmm.
DNA. Like, what if getting connected with these higher beings is a way for us to be able to unlock some of those mysteries? What
Hmm.
if,
Yeah.
right? We will never benefit from that potential if we don't believe in that potential and if we have fear about it.
Yeah.
And again, the fear is understandable, but just because there's fear, it's not always rational and it's not always beneficial. We have to really kind of figure out where that fear is good for us and when it's not. And I think this is a good time, Ken, since you've had your own experience. What can you say about your openness and how that played into you being able to experience what you did?
For me, it was literally everything. Like I had inner leadings to pursue some form of shamanic practice for many years, and I just put it off for many different reasons. And then finally, at one point, I said, you know what? I'm just gonna open up to this and do it. And took a very short course in the Foundation for Shamanistic Studies. Has a very several day intro level course where they take you through just how to open to different realms of experience. And I had moderate success in a couple of those exercises, nothing fantastic, but it was enough to reveal to me like, okay, these spaces of dimensional experience there's something here that I've never touched in before. This is new. Has expanded my mind and my experiential palette somewhat. And then, literally within hours of completing that course, I went outside and opened myself to a wider range of experience and had a what I term to be a beyond physical experience, so a more etheric related craft that presented itself to me, not only in the visual sense, but also began telepathically providing me messaging about where they were from, what sort of entities they contained, what sort of timetable their interaction with human experience, why they were in the specific geographic location that they were at. And then the visual experience began to evolve and morph over the period of about 25 to 30 minutes or so. I think primarily to show me just how dynamic and how um, creative that we become as we evolve into higher, more wider realms of experience. Like it was not a hard physical metallic object like we see in the movies. This was it held a form that could be described, and I was able to describe three separate forms over the course of that 30 minutes. But it also went through almost like clouds changing. It went through like an
Mm.
etheric shift
Hmm.
between those forms where you could see that there was intelligence that was causing that transformation from one sort of symbolic form to another. There were hieroglyphics, there were numbers, there were moving symbols and signs, there were human-like faces that emerged from the surface. So all of these things, again, to me, were just cementing into my mind, like, we know you, we know your culture, you come from us, you're part of us, we're part of you. Like, this is an integrated thing. We're coming back into your experience and you back into ours. And this is just one very brief introduction to what that transformation for humanity might look like. I'm not sitting here trying to suggest that that's the way it's going to come about for everybody, but that was only the first of what I hope to be dozens or hundreds of those types of experiences. And it was beautiful. It was loving, it was
Hmm.
compassionate, it was connective, it was brotherly, non-domineering. Nothing about it was aggressive, and it gave me absolute hope and just nothing but optimism for where that dynamic is going to go in the future. I have literally zero fear from that point on. Like, not that I had much before, but like there
Yeah.
is completely no fear about the um, whether it takes a year or 50 years for being to being type contact, however that may
Hmm.
occur on this planet, doesn't matter really. The timing of it is sort of insignificant at this point. Just now, kind of knowing like, okay, this is real. This is not movies. This is not fantasy. This is absolute reality. And all the things that we're reading about in, for anybody in the audience who's into like channel documents or, um, psychic type projections about what's coming for humanity in the next several decades, there's hundreds or thousands of individuals on our planet right now that are saying they're connecting to individuals and civilizations and beings and entities and archangels and, beyond Earth presences and giving us all kinds of great information about what they have to say and share with us. But until
Yeah.
you have an experience of your own in some form, whether it's a direct sighting or a telepathic interaction or whatever, like there is still that element of belief or disbelief that may still occur. Um, to me, I
Yeah.
think these individual contact experiences just offer a opportunity for the individual to open up and say, okay, this has altered my perception of what reality is, at least a little bit, to where I can continue to open up, continue to broaden my perspectives going forward.
Couple of things came up in hearing your story. First is when you were saying that it was shifting shapes and all of this, but it had a form.
Mhm.
I just thought that was like such an exemplary example of that balance of how it can be physical, that there is value in the physical and helping us to understand, like, okay, you're there,
Mhm.
but it's shifting. So now we're we're seeing that there's a connection with your perception and consciousness at play in
Yeah.
seeing this and in interpreting this. But at the very foundation of that experience, so firstly, in saying that, it's not strictly physical. There's an element of the consciousness
Yeah.
of your openness to seeing that. That's important. So if you're trying to have your own experience there, you can't just be like, oh yeah, prove yourself, right?
Mhm.
There's
Right.
you're coming at it with like a skepticism. So with you, it's like you've opened up your consciousness to be able to see it because it isn't just material, it's something else.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so at the foundation of that, you had to you were seeking this experience. And what was, what did you have, what kind of state did you have to be in to even be able to experience what you did?
So I was still within sort of maybe an hour or so of coming out of that shamanic meditative state, which was induced with drumming and rattling. That was part of that
Mm-hmm.
particular course, and that alters your conscious awareness. Like you open and expand to some. I'm no expert in the dimensional realms by any means, but you expand to some level of dimensional understanding and awareness that is not this typical physical space. And so I think I was still sort of tuned to that. Um, I also had literally one puff of cannabis at the time. You know, they say in shamanic
Yeah.
practice that plant medicine is relatively common, and I very rarely have any sort of chemical type substance like that. But in this particular situation, it just felt like a very natural and sort of, I don't know, it was just a natural thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then I sat down, and within 5 minutes of sitting down on the back porch and looking up at the sky, this sort of just unfolded. And I'll add to this, like I also had the experience of my own disbeliefs started to affect the concreteness of the form. I could literally
Mm.
see how it would become less solid and less distinct against the backdrop of the clouds in the sky if I started to drop the desire to perceive and the focus and the belief that, holy shit, this is real. This is really happening. Like I could see it fade out, and then I would go, wait, no, I want to see it. I want to participate in this experience. I want to be part of this. I want this connection. And it would come back into, it's almost like when you let your eyes relax and then you focus your
Mm-hmm.
eyes and then it was like that type of experience, only it wasn't in the visual, it was in the mind. I could literally tell that it was my mind's involvement and investment in the experience as being real and meaningful that was controlling sort of the aperture of focus in the brain.
Yeah. So I feel like what I'm getting from your story and from, say, Chris Bledsoe's story, and again, just to have another make another point about Chris Bledsoe is he's so he has experiences all the time that he's actually been studied by like NASA and all these government entities. And for some people that raises a lot of suspicion, but I think it's mostly because they can see he's so connected to this
Mhm.
phenomenon
Mhm.
and they want to know why because
Mhm.
they can't connect with this phenomenon.
Right.
And I think what Chris Bledsoe has said and what you, I feel like from your story, what you're saying is because it's not about an aggression to find out
Yeah.
what they are and what it's about connection. There's a
Yeah.
difference between aggression and connection. And the way you approached and how you got your experience is by wanting to connect,
Mhm.
not so you can have some news or knowledge or something to bring to the material, but just as this desire to connect with something bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
And that is foundational, that is fundamental to this phenomenon. And it's not about the knowing, it's about the connection.
That's such a good
And
point.
that's where we need to approach this, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. If you like I said, I haven't listened to Chris as much as you have, but like the sense you get from that individual is just this sense of very quiet, very humble, very like
Hmm.
there's no ego in this man whatsoever. He just
No,
presents himself as
he's so
very,
sweet.
very
Yeah.
sweet, very kind, very compassionate. Like that comes across immediately.
Yeah.
That to me is the most important. Like how NASA has not figured that out, I have no idea, but they don't, probably most of them are very intellectual. They're not probably
Absolutely.
heart open and
It's yeah.
they don't even detect that aspect of how he's so unique, you know?
Hmm.
But that to me is probably pointing to there's going to be waves and phases of individuals who connect to these types of experiences first. There already are, but that will, on a larger, on a mass scale, you'll start to see probably children, probably
Mhm.
women who are traditionally more intuitive and more heart focused, and those of us among us who are non-domineering, non-achievement oriented, non-focused on the getting what we want out of life at the expense of everybody else.
Yeah,
Those,
I think that's an important point that you're making, because when you think of something like a NASA or a government or something, it's like they have this idea that they are the ones that have the knowledge, and
yeah,
they are the ones that are going to disperse that to the baby birds, the people,
yeah,
right?
right.
And that mentality and that perspective, I think, is one that needs to die off,
Hmm.
right? Hierarchy in general.
Yeah,
And so when you listen to Chris or other spiritual leaning perspectives regarding UFOs, is it's available to all. And when you think about it that way, like this connection is available to all of us if we can move past our fear and have belief,
hmm,
then I can see why that would be threatening to a system that likes hierarchy, that likes to be like, we are the central power
yeah,
for the people. And
yeah,
that the same way that the Roman Catholic Church back in Galileo's days felt threatened by his message and his discovery about the earth, revolving around the sun. In this case, it's like if this is a consciousness thing, we all have consciousness.
hmm,
And if accessing these entities, these beings happens through consciousness, we all have access to that.
that's
And
right.
that's threatening, right?
Yeah,
So to certain things, to certain systems. And so that's why fear is such a good tool to control people, because it keeps them limited.
hmm,
And I think so, in seeing things this way and knowing that you are so much more powerful than you think, and you are the one that limits yourself when you have fear, there's an opportunity here for you to kind of expand and to grow if you can transcend that fear. And so in winding down this conversation, Ken, if UFOs exist, and I think it's pretty clear that it's harder and harder to deny the existence of other civilizations outside of our planet. I mean, how might they, expand our understanding of creation and interconnectedness, when we can have a more balanced perspective that can honor the fear that we have and understand it, but also be able to move beyond it so that we can be curious and open to a true connection.
yeah. I think the answer to that to me is infinitely. That's what is so exciting about this point in time. I really think this is an indicator that we are going from an experience of we live in a world that sees itself as one thing and isolated from the rest of the universe. And now we're moving into a time where at least we're seeing the potential that that limitedness is going to get flipped on its head and become literal unlimitedness, where we will find that we have access to probably an overwhelming amount of experience and information. And it's going to be like when the internet came online.
Mm-hmm,
I was
mm-hmm.
alive and an adult back in 90, whatever it was, 4 or 5, when the internet burst on the scene. And all of, I mean, literally within weeks, we went from you had to send a letter with a stamp on it.
Right.
It took a week to get to somebody. And then I remember the first time somebody showed me how to send an email, and it went instantaneously. And they said,
Like
"All right, I can do it
what?
right now."
Yeah,
And it blew my mind.
absolutely.
And then websites came online, and you had access to information all over the world. And we didn't even have probably a 1% of what's available
Yeah.
today.
It was wild, wild
Yeah.
times,
But
wild
that to me
times.
is it's a model for what this paradigm is going to
Hmm.
deliver to us, is that level of just explosive capacity in who and what we are and what's available to us throughout the creation.
Yeah, and you know what? We always make it through. We always make it through those tumultuous, mind-blowing periods of history. And it hasn't always been graceful. We haven't always acted in our highest ideals, but we can learn from that and we can project that the higher version of ourselves into this mystery, into this unknown, right? Because, and I think this is the key takeaway, right, from this conversation is that, regardless of whether UFOs actually pose a real threat or not, right? Because if they kill us all, okay, sorry, we were wrong.
We won't be here to
Okay.
worry about it, will we?
Yeah, that's what happens. Okay. But why are we going to take away the precious minutes of our day
Mhm,
believing that that's what's going to happen? Let's examine the opportunities that exist. So whether or not they are a real threat, it's how we respond to them and how we respond to these moments of figuring out what to do and how we can live and react to this unknown, this huge unknown,
mhm,
um, really reflects our own personal capacity for growth, unity, and understanding. So what is it saying about you? I think this is very true, especially in this, in this particular topic of UFOs, but just in general, every unknown in your life, it's just an opportunity to reflect to you your capacity for growth and unity and understanding and connection.
mhm.
So again, it's like, is this a test? Like we're playing with toys, and are we kind of being evaluated on how well we can respond to this moment? And how are you going to do that?
I think it's entirely possible. To me, I think life's a lot more fun just in general when you live it optimistically and looking forward to the events of the future rather than shirking back and walling off from especially the unknowns. And so that's what I'm choosing. And so far, even with regard to interaction with what I purport to be non-Earth oriented beings, it's led to something pretty beautiful.
I
So,
love that. Exactly. And its choice is yours. The
mm,
choice is always yours. How are you going to show up in this moment?
yeah.
And it doesn't change that fundamental choice that we have. It's always there, regardless of we're talking about what are you going to have for lunch, or what are you going to, how are you going to show up with this UFO mystery? What's your perspective on that? It's always down to that, to you and your own balance between mind and heart, feminine, masculine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what do we got coming up?
Well, I think now is a good time to receive our tarot message for the week. And
Sounds
who
great.
knows, it might or it might not relate to what we've been talking about. We'll just see what happens. So here we go. Let me shuffle my cards here and get grounded to be able to deliver our message this week. And again, as a reminder, our tarot segment is one that uh, represents connecting and integrating mind and intellect and intuition,
Mm,
feminine and masculine, in that the cards themselves represent an archetype. And when I draw three cards, I know logically what archetype they represent. And then that's the masculine side, the lines, if you will, the structure. And then I allow my intuition to open and to receive messages. And then those cards essentially start talking to me and giving me messages. And then I share them with you in this case, or, privately with people I read for. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and draw my cards and get my message, and then I will share what that is in just
awesome.
in just a second.
Can't wait.
I know this part is really fun. So I got my first card here. Oh, the two just popped out right here. Okay. Interesting. Oh wow, we got two major arcana cards. Usually when the major arcana cards show up, there's like a really profound message that we should really kind of consider more closely and explore. So let me see what we got here. We drew the Lover's card again. We did this last week. There is such a
That was
strong
last year,
message for
last week.
anyone listen, for the people who listen, that there is such a strong message about choice and free will in
Yeah.
this. It's not our center card. Our center card is judgment. And that tells me that there's a time, this is a moment of reckoning. there's an energy of a moment of reckoning here, and it is an independent thing. So it's not about focusing on, well, society is this way or this is happening over here. This is about you.
Mm,
And this is like a moment of reckoning and a choice and realizing that your responsibility in the choices that you've made and what's happened and what is happening, it's on you. Okay. And and in doing this, and this isn't like a reprimand, this is just accountability and this is for your growth. And in realizing and coming to this reckoning and taking responsibility of the choices that you've made, you will get new understanding here with the Page of Swords. And you'll be able to move forward with this new knowledge into it opens you up to a path of new knowledge, knowledge, towards like this journey to the King of Swords, which is just this strong authority over your own mind. Actually, this is a strong message of intellect. So
mm,
in before, if you don't take this accountability and taking responsibility for the actions and choices that you've made, it's going to be hard for you to progress intellectually. So it's a very interesting message here.
mm.
So
Applied judgment, applied discernment, and
mhm,
accept
mhm.
responsibility. Do you think that's referring to like past actions or going forward or both, or where would you see the time frame? Does that come out in the
I think it has a lot to do with the past,
mm,
because like the past informs our present,
mm,
but it's also like taking this into the future, because if you can see how taking ownership of your choices that you've made and how that always leads you to a moment of reckoning, then you will see the benefit of doing that
mm,
instead of always blaming outside or feeling out of control, or as if the universe happens to you, not for you, kind of a thing, or that you even have a role in what you experience.
mm,
And in learning that, or in accepting that, right, with the representative here of the judgment card, it's like it just the phrase I'm hearing is it's a moment of reckoning.
mm.
It's just a moment of reckoning of the responsibility that we have and the choices that we make. And that is what's going to lead us to a new way of thinking intellectually.
Wow.
It's so interesting that it's a strong message of intellectual when we've been trying to focus on like the feminine and the intuition, but
Mm,
we need a new way of thinking.
yeah.
And that can't happen if we don't have a moment of reckoning first.
Wow.
So that's like the overall message. And because it's a major arcana, I think this is like a more like a major message, not just for this week, but just in general. Um, and it's just so weird that we've drawn the Lover's card twice,
It
because
seems,
there's such a strong call for making the right choices and just taking ownership of your choices.
yeah, this theme today, we've touched on love and fear as they relate to the UFO paradigm in particular, but to me,
Hmm.
this is indicative of a choice that's being sort of forced on people across all aspects of their life right now. Like
Yeah,
in general, are you going to stand for the philosophy of unity and equality matters, or are you going to continue on this modality of my needs individually, or my family's needs, or my tribe, my country matters the most? It's a real, no kidding choice, day to day, moment to moment. And if most of
yeah.
the time you're spending on that more constrictive choice, you're choosing to extend that experience in your own reality. So
Yeah,
that's
it's
a
so limiting to see everything outside of yourself.
mm,
When you're giving your power away to the physical, to the reality, when you say, "Oh, I would be more happy, I would be happier, I would be more joyful, I could be more successful if A, B, or C would be different,
yeah.
or XYZ would happen." You're giving ownership to that
Mhm.
versus putting all of that inside of yourself. Again, the judgment card of reckoning and realizing that you're doing it to yourself,
Yeah.
you know? And there are things outside of our control. And when that happens, I think a better perspective would be, okay, what is this? What opportunity is it presenting to me?
Mm,
And that's, to me personally, that's a perspective and that new knowledge that I've had because of my reckoning and accepting of my responsibilities, moving away from a victimhood person like perspective.
Mm.
That's why I'm able to have that inner stability, inner peace, and acceptance for whatever the fuck happens. I'm going to find a way to make it an
Embrace.
opportunity. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Embrace every experience. It's not easy. I know it's not easy,
It's
but
not.
there is a way to sort of back out of the present circumstance, at least for a little bit, and go, okay, I can maybe see a little bit of value in this,
Yeah.
even if it
Yeah.
hurts at the moment.
Yeah. Perfect. I loved
Good
it.
stuff.
This was a wonderful show. Hey, you
Yeah.
guys, thank you for sitting with us this hour or so and talking to us about UFOs and how are we going to look at them, with fear, with curiosity, what? I hope you've had a good time hanging out and getting some insights, and hopefully we gave you something to think about and inspired you to find ways to connect, not just with UFOs and other entities, but with each other with love and acceptance. So if we did that for you, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss out. We have a new episode coming out every Sunday morning. So, yeah, subscribe. And also, let us know what you think. What do you think about UFOs? Are you afraid of them? If so, that's okay. But are you curious about them also? And what do you think could happen? What are some of your fantasies and ideas about what could happen if human beings and extraterrestrials were to unite? Would it be a battle or could it open up whole new possibilities that we don't even know? Yeah, so post those comments below. Ken, let us know. What are we talking about next week?
Well, first off, I just want to say this was a fun episode. I love talking about UFOs in general,
Yeah.
and I look forward to the day that instead of like Netflix or you going to the movie theater, we're all sitting outside by the fire doing watch parties and watching the space brethren and sisters dance for us in the sky. It's going to happen.
Oh, wow. I love that.
I feel it coming, so I'm going to be optimistic about that. Um, yeah, folks, next week we got another good one. We're talking education and the toxic masculine. So our current educational system, we know has a lot of issues and limitations and can be very constraining and confining and not necessarily open to the creative potentials that our children or even our college students really demand and deserve. So we're going to dive into that a bit and maybe talk about some ways in which we can balance out our education system and hopefully expand, just as we were talking about today, expand our knowledge and understanding of who and what we are. So can't wait for that.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, and don't forget to visit our social media channels. All the links are below. Um, yeah, connect and subscribe, all the good things. And always remember that every moment offers us a choice. Are we going to build a bridge or are we going to burn one down? It's up to you.
And as co-creators of our shared reality, let's choose wisely.
All right. Until next week. See you later. Bye.
Bye, guys.